Well, greetings to everyone. I hope this finds you well. Happy Easter to you. Today, I am back in a familiar setting. You may recall this is where I recorded a lot of my sermons during the period of COVID. Now, the reason that I'm recording a sermon here in my office today is because our Easter service this year is going to be outside, and so we were not going to be able to record it like we normally do inside in the auditorium. But Eric and I thought that for those who are not able to be with us on Sunday morning on Easter and might be watching online this weekend, that you might like the opportunity to hear the Easter sermon on Easter Day, or at least somewhere close to it. And so rather than being a week delayed, we decided that I would just record this message in my office so that for those who would like to hear it on or around Easter, you would be able to. So that's what we're doing here this week. In the lead up to Easter, we have been looking at Isaiah chapter 53 and have focused very intently on the Old Testament's greatest portrayal of the sacrifice of Jesus. Not only is it the Old Testament's greatest portrayal, it's actually the greatest portrayal in all of the Bible. The New Testament doesn't go into a lot of detail about what the crucifixion was actually like, but through the prophetic writings of Isaiah in the 53rd chapter of his book, we have been able to explore several facets of the suffering and sacrifice of the servant of the Lord. But we are done with that for a while. All of that focus on death and on the sacrifice of Christ has been in order to help us appreciate with more joy the good news of the resurrection. And that is what we celebrate here on Easter. So in order to do that, today we are going to have the first of what is going to be a new series of lessons for us here in the late spring and early summer. We're going to be talking about the great I am statements from the Gospel of John. Those statements include things like, I am the bread of life, and I am the light of the world. We'll look at how Christ is the true shepherd and how he is the way and the truth and the life. But I thought, since we are starting here on Easter morning with this new series, there's really no better place to begin in the I am statements with the greatest of all the I am statements from John chapter 11. I am the resurrection and the life. Now, we'll begin this series more formally next Sunday morning with a more appropriate introduction, whenever the majority of the congregation will be inside and it's warmer and we're able to give more attention to it. But for a few brief moments here on Easter, I thought we would celebrate the resurrection by thinking about these special words from John chapter 11. You know, it's been a hard winter for us. Since Christmas, we have lost some very special people here in this congregation. And really, if you go back to Easter of last year and think about all that has happened in 2021 and the beginning part here of 2022, we've lost even more people in this church. In the 6 years that I've spent here with you, I don't think we've ever had a string as of many funerals as we have had in the last several months. I'm very grateful to Rick and his willingness to preside over many of those funerals. There are two reasons that I'm grateful for this. Number one, I know how much it means to many of you here in the congregation for Rick to be able to do funerals for you because he's known you for so many years. You know, I still get calls from time to time from people down in Sladen where I spent many years ministering. And, their loved ones call me, and because I knew them and know their life story and shared life with them, they ask if I can come and do their funerals. Rick ministered here in this congregation for over 30 years, and that gives him a special ability to do funerals in a way that no one else could do for this congregation. Secondly, I'm grateful to him for this because he has a wonderful gift for doing funerals. He has this special ability to kind of catch the essence of someone's life, and I'm so grateful that he still shares that with the congregation in his retirement. So thank you, Rick, for doing that. So we've all felt the sting of death in our congregation this winter. If it hasn't touched your family personally, certainly it has touched someone that you love, because we are all part of the family of God here at Riverwalk. Sometimes, whenever I'm conducting funerals, I like to go to this passage in John chapter 11, especially when it is the death of someone that comes unexpectedly, or perhaps as someone younger. In this story here in John chapter 11, one of Jesus' very close personal friends dies. His name is Lazarus. Now, we often don't think about that Jesus was one who had close friends during his time here on the earth. We think Jesus ought to love everybody, right? And yes, of course, he does love everybody. He is the creator of everyone. But he is still a man, and so, during his time here on earth, he had people that he had a more natural affection for. Some of the disciples must have been included in that list of people, and including the three, Peter, James, and John. But so also were there friends like Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha. Lazarus develops a sickness of some kind. We don't know what it is, but we know it's serious. And so his two sisters send word to Jesus, who's ministering in an area that's a several days' walk away. And they say to him, "Lord, the one whom you love is sick." The implication being, you'd better come quickly. But interestingly, Jesus, when he received the message from the two sisters, he doesn't respond to it. He tells his disciples, this sickness is not going to end in death. It is for God's glory, so that God may be glorified by it. Now, the text doesn't record the disciples' reaction, but it was likely something like this. The disciples have got used to Jesus saying strange things from time to time, and they have long stopped trying to figure out what he means. So, Jesus waits 2 days before he decides to finally act upon this message. Finally, he tells his disciples, let's go back to Judea, where Lazarus lives. The disciples are quite concerned about this. The reason that they are not in Judea in the first place is just because it's become dangerous for them to be there. They remind Jesus the last time they was there, the leaders tried to stone them. And Jesus responds by saying, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble. It is a person who walks at night that stumbles. And once again, I think the disciples probably looked at one another and went, they have no idea what this means, and frankly, neither do I. But finally, he just tells them plainly, our friend Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I am actually glad that I was not there, so that you can believe. Jesus is clearly up to something. And so they leave for Judea. By the time they get there, of course, Lazarus is dead. Not just died a few minutes ago dead, but dead for 4 days dead. He doesn't quite yet reach the village of Bethany, the hometown of Lazarus and Mary and Martha, before word gets to the sisters that he has arrived. And so before he can ever come into the city itself, Martha, who is always the one to act very quickly, she runs out to the edge of town and she meets him on the road. And she falls at his feet and she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. You can hear the agony in her question. And you can also hear her saying, I thought he was your good friend. Why didn't you come sooner? Why didn't you come when we asked you to? Jesus has a very interesting response for her, but we'll come back to that in a minute. When Martha was done bearing her soul before the Lord, she goes back into town and she gets her sister Mary. Jesus again is waiting there on the edge of town, and whenever Mary comes out to see him, she says the same thing that Martha did. "Oh, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." At this point, Jesus seems very moved by all of the distress that he sees. Now, I personally think he had a very soft spot in his heart for Mary. Remember, she was the one who poured perfume on Jesus' feet and washed it with her hair. She's the one who sat at Jesus' feet with the other men when Martha was kind of frustrated that she was not helping her in the kitchen. And so when Jesus sees her deep grief and the grief of all those who had accompanied her, he too was moved to weeping. He wept even though he knew full well what he was about to do. With that in mind, that brings me back to the statement that I skipped over just a minute ago when I was talking about Jesus and Martha together. And because it is Easter morning, it is these words that I really want to draw your attention to today. When Martha cried out to him, Jesus said to her, "Martha, your brother will rise again." And in her tears, in her grief, she says back to him, "Oh, yes, I know that he will rise again at the resurrection on the last day." And in that, Martha expresses probably what you and I have often felt in our moments of grief. Yes, I know there is a great future. I know there's heaven. I know there is the resurrection, but what I really want is my loved one here with me now. Jesus gets that. He understands that sentiment. That's why he weeps with them. Death is still tragic even though there is a grand future. But on that particular day, Jesus had more in mind than just a general doctrine of the resurrection at the end of time. He was going to raise Lazarus that very day. And so Jesus says to her, "No, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die." Why did Jesus say that? Two reasons, I am convinced. Number one, he was asserting his power over both life and death, and he was promising Mary and Martha that even though their brother had been dead long enough to begin to decompose, he still had the power to raise him up and give him life again, and he would do that very thing in a few moments. But secondly, he was pointing to something that as of yet no Jew had ever fathomed. Through a long process that I won't go into here at the moment, the Jews had developed the notion over time that the resurrection was going to happen at the end of the age for all of God's righteous people. But what they had not imagined is that there was going to be one resurrection in the middle of history that was going to make all other resurrections possible. Why was that necessary? It's because the power of death first had to be broken. You see, whenever Jesus raises several people throughout his ministry from the dead, including little girls and little boys, and now his friend Lazarus, it might be more of what we would call a resuscitation than it is a resurrection. Because, guess what? All those people that he raised, eventually they're going to get sick and die again. The true resurrection is not just a resuscitation. It is a complete freedom from the power of death and decay forever. No human had ever experienced such a thing, not even Lazarus. Christ was the first of this resurrection, and because he was the first, that resurrection has now been assured to all who will put their confidence in him. So, even though it may be true that our congregation is feeling the sting of death over these last several months, we are able to carry on in joy because of the truths that Jesus has proclaimed in this passage. On 7 different occasions, Jesus spoke with these I am statements in the Gospel of John. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the true vine, and so on. But the greatest one that he ever spoke is I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus himself holds the power of life. Why? Because he's the only one who ever died but then broke free from the bonds of death. And when he came back alive, he was not just present in his old corruptible flesh that he first shared with us. No, when he came alive again, he was endowed with a new body that is beyond the power of death forever. And church, that same fate awaits all of us who have put our trust and confidence in Christ. And that's what we celebrate on Easter. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Thanks be to God, because through his resurrection, he gives us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Happy Easter to each and every one of you.